back, everybody, to the next edition of our bi-weekly webinar here at North Texas State Soccer Association. This is going to be a really good one. Like I said, I've seen the presentation that Kostas put together, and it's going to be really interesting, especially the parts of, like we were talking about before this, the use of the guided questions, allowing kids to have input into what's happening and just developing an overall practice plan. So I know that this could be really good. But without further ado, let me go and introduce, we've got Kostas Hatzikoutelis, and I hope I did that correctly because I've been practicing in my head for like the last 10 minutes. So hope that sounded okay. And then he's actually with the Georgia Youth Soccer Association, and my gosh, is a stalwart within the ODP programs, coaching, education. Pretty much anywhere you get soccer in the United States, you got Kostas. And thank you very much for joining us today. I mean, it's awesome to have you here, and awesome to have you join us to help our coaches out here in North Texas and around the country.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I don't know what you've done, but I'm getting coaches from my part of the world asking about this webinar. I think, Warren, you're going to start a trend. You're going to raise the bar for me to have to do something like this. So we're excited to be here. Thank you for the invite, and looking forward to it for sure.
Oh yeah, well, and anytime I can help out, if you want me to help get this thing going, I don't mind doing that as well. Like
Awesome.
I said, it's been had a huge impact within North Texas, and feel free to share anything I got because you were nice enough to share this with us.
Yeah, great. No, and it is part of what it is, and for the coaches involved, for those that may or may not be familiar with what Warren and I do, a lot of it is just a lot of collaboration, and this is just part of learnings that we take and pull from other technical leaders across the country. So it's pretty cool to be able to share. I think that's how we all the all boats rise type mentality. And be able to share this information. So whenever you're ready, I think I got controls. I can just go at it, Warren, whenever you want.
And she's all yours. I'll sit back and enjoy the show.
Very quickly. We're going to be able to share this as well, Warren, and then maybe get it as well and share it to all the coaches. Just real briefly, want to touch base a couple things. If you all would like to open up your chat as well, whoever's on the call, and just go ahead and, because we may use it, we may ask you to have participation. And by the way, in the collaborative nature of this webinar, just go ahead and unmute yourself, ask any questions as we're rolling through. It's completely cool, right? One of the challenges that we have in terms of what our role is as coaches, what our role is as technical development leaders, right? Is the importance of autonomy within coaching. And so what I want to do is kind of just touch base a little bit what our job is. I view it as a way to develop creative players. And the key factor in this whole thing is how do we make players make, or not how we make them, how we provide them the opportunity to make their own decisions and solve problems on the field. At the ultimate pinnacle of success, top players make their own decisions. They're able to assess the situation, learn from it, provide options, right? And we'll talk about how those options may be created. And then how do we then support them if we truly in a player-centered development model, if that's really our focus, if we truly believe that the player is the main actor in the play, right? How do we get to that point? How do we get to that point in being a resource for these athletes to get to their level? All right. And then we'll have a few minutes at the end. We'll have open questions. But like I said, in this environment, first of all, let's have some fun. If you know who, first of all, open up your chat if you do. And I'm going to give you some hints on who this little guy is on the screen. So don't press enter yet on the chat, but I'm going to give you some hints. You can unmute yourself if you want, but don't yell it out just yet. I'm going to give you some along the way, all right? So this player, all right, was discarded, obviously, lived, raised in London early on, was discarded by every EPL club in London. Okay? All right. He was released in his first year. Arsenal picked him up in the academy. And, Arsene Wenger, he says this may be the biggest regret he ever made. And he in his review, in his assessment, was a bit chubby and not very athletic. That was the assessment that this player got early on. Okay. He returned to his first club, which was Ridgeway Rovers. He went on on loan to Watford, right? And from Watford, that's where he was identified in 2006 for a future EPL club. Anybody want to take a guess who that is? You can unmute.
I've got absolutely no idea.
You have no idea? Hey, that's good
No
that it
idea.
worked, right? That's the whole intent of this thing. It's exactly worked. Anybody else? I don't know if anybody wants to jump in. I'll give you before I actually pull back the curtain. No clue. Perfect. Harry Kane. All right. Obviously, his accolades.
That's insane. That's insane.
Right. Here's a kid that was just, it kind of, and I put that up just for a lot, obviously for fun, right? But also to kind of hey, we don't know what this path of these kids are. Like we don't have a crystal ball, right? Here's a kid that was discarded, literally discarded. By the way, I'm going to give you. Let me see if I can go back. So this other, you see the other person with his arm around it. I'll try to share the bigger picture of it, and that's David Beckham. When he had that's his brand. If you recall that logo, that was his brand when he came out, kind of commercialized it. But anyway, but see, so here's a young man that's obviously very successful, had a tremendous career, still has a tremendous career, right? Even though he left Tottenham, he's obviously playing in Germany. But it's very cool to see how players can develop. And there's different ages and stages. There's the developmental path. Do we really know the players well enough to be able to do this? Obviously, if we have someone like an Arsene Wenger that made this mistake, we certainly can make it every day. And that's part of the cool thing of the game, right? The game is constantly learning. We always see opportunities. And here's a young person that when he was young, he decided, well, I'm going to show them, right? So much of the developmental journey is owned by the player themselves. Cool. Fun, right? So we could go into this. So just real quickly on this thing. So then how do we get to that point? How do we help these players, whether they're a young Harry Kane or a young Ronaldo, whoever we want to do, right? How do we get them to that point? Well, I believe it starts with us, right? We must be able to take more risk, become more vulnerable, right? Go through a learning opportunity like we're doing. We're sharing information. We're collaborating with other coaches. We're understanding what may work, what may not work, and then learn from those as we grow, right? I mean, ultimately, if we want creative players, we need to be creative in our ability to learn, have an open mindset in how we move forward, right? And understand that there may not be just one way to go to the top level. There might be multiple paths. It might be multiple lefts and rights to get to that point, right? It's just like a game, right? Think about when we're attacking on a goal. Sometimes we do switch the point of attack. Sometimes we do play back to our back line, right? Maybe sometimes all the way back to our keeper to get things going again, maintain possession and go through it. So that's kind of my mindset as we go through it. That's why I was excited with Warren when he came on board and we started talking about stuff. Man, I go, this is a guy that I want to work with, and opportunities for us to help and support all the coaches, because I think we all have a job. So, as we go through this thing, let's understand, really going back to the topic, autonomy. Like what is autonomy? How do we define it, right? So I went through the dictionary and I went through Google and all this stuff, and I came with some key words. One is it reflects and references freedom. Right? It's the will of one's actions, self-governing, right? Ultimately, it's about ownership of decision making. So just like as we're asking for those players, we're asking also for players of autonomy for our coaching staff, right? It's basically the opportunity for each of us to make decisions to reach a goal, whatever that goal may be. Okay, whether it's a player, whether it's a coach, whether it's a club director or a state technical leader, these are decisions that we own. Okay, I'll stop for any questions on that. Everything's understandable? Cool. All right, great. So I'm going to give you guys a time to read something. I'd like for you to read this thing by Johan Cruyff. So arguably, probably more famous than Harry Kane. But anyway, so just take 15 seconds, 30 seconds to read that, please. Excellent. So I would like some of you to unmute and just what resonates with you about those two sentences and those two little paragraphs.
I'm happy to jump in here. I
Yes,
think
please.
one of the the obvious dilemma as a grassroots coach or a youth coach is that balance of winning and developing. You want to win to maintain and retain your stronger players and their interest and obviously the parents and everybody involved, but at the same time there's a need to develop the weaker players, because if we can strengthen the weakest link, then the team by default gets better. So there's always that constant juggling act, I guess.
Yeah, well said. Absolutely. And it's also a scenario where we don't always get the same level player on a team, do we? Do we, Mark? We just don't get him. We just don't get a
exactly
quality.
Exactly. I mean, it's a seems like it's always a case of the top third of your rosters is strong, and the bottom third is weak, and you got a bunch in the middle there, and it's the challenge of trying to drive training sessions to keep all of those levels engaged and doing their best and learning how whatever it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. It reminds me of a story I heard, and I think the coach did tell it to me very seriously, and we ended up being a kind of a joke for us. I was asking, because how do you become a good coach? And his answer was, well, you get the best players. So I thought that was that you could take it different ways, right? But we don't always have the luxury of getting the best players, right? Part of it is the responsibility that we have in developing some players. Great, thank you, Mark, for jumping in. Anybody else want any more input to extend and expand on what Mark said, but also just go in a different direction? It's completely cool.
What stands out to me really is if you look at it, it comes down to ego. A lot of times, what are we coaching the kids for? And sometimes we put a loss in as a hit to the ego or your ability to coach, when maybe that's not the case at all. When you match up against a team that's more talented or whatnot, you still have to put the eye and the prize at the end, which is developing players to be who they're supposed to be, and where people can just up and leave at any point in time. So it's like a balancing act between all the things. But sometimes you wonder if, like Johan Cruyff, I think the key to what he says is to put the club first. And so if you have a good club environment where it builds out from the top to the bottom with like messaging, so that people understand the point and why you're doing what you're doing, maybe that'll help out. I know there's others in the group here that might be able to speak to that as well. Or your thoughts?
Yeah, it's open mic, whatever you want to do. And sometimes I think I did a little bit more research on Johan Cruyff, and one of the things is he had very clear philosophy and a mission vision type of thing of what he wanted to do, especially when he went to Barcelona, right? Went back there. So he had a very clear, defined identity, right? And for him, the results of a youth game weren't really as important as he kind of created this culture around the program and the club. Happy to hear any additional comments. That's awesome. All feedback is good right now. This is part of the collaboration that we talked about earlier. Anything else? Awesome. No worries. We'll keep moving on. I thought it was really neat from a quote perspective, because I think it kind of really ties into the next piece of what we're talking about, and really the important piece of the course, right? It's the autonomy. For me, I have very simply, better environments equal better players. To me, it's a really easy kind of connecting the dots between what we're established on the field and what we can do. And it starts with that autonomy. It starts with the empowerment, trusting the players to make decisions and boosting the confidence and self-efficacy. That's basically, they'll build on that as they go forward. I'll go through a few things that I've identified and read through Phases of Play. You can look at it through different portals, but they've done a really good job in kind of putting this together in terms of how autonomy affects the development of a player, right? One gap that we have is the game intelligence. Some people call it soccer IQ, other folks call it a soccer brain, however you want to do it, right? It's the ability to solve problems, right? And how do we as coaches create an environment that we were just talking about, right? Without necessarily prescribing every answer or every specific solution. So when a player is able to read the situation, right? Decide what best course of action to take, right? That becomes invaluable as the player grows through, and it says it on here, right? The unpredictable scenarios of real match conditions. The game is very unpredictable, especially when the whistle blows and everything starts going, not necessarily sure what things are going to happen. So if we can, through the training session, provide this game intelligence by adding these problems, these challenges, these scenarios for them to solve, then it's a better opportunity for them to react when they get to the game. Okay. Now, these problem solvers, what does that mean? Okay. That means that we have to relook at what we do as coaches. Less is more sometimes, right? Provide less instruction, right? But so they can experiment with different solutions. Okay. Again, ties back into the high pressure situations that come in a game, right? They all want to win. There's not even a doubt about it. We as coaches want to win. No one's questioning that. And I'm not saying defer that to the back and it doesn't matter. Okay, that always matters. But think about the impact that can be made on that player's development when they solve their own problem and they create and experiment different solutions. And sometimes the best learning can be by mistake. This is where I do that for you, right? And then ultimately it builds this consistency, this resilience, right? They're not relying on some coach always telling them what to do, right? Pastor Jose, right? Go support Mary, right? We don't necessarily need to spoon feed everything to them, right? Now, in those scenarios where players are used to always getting information constantly, right? We call this from the sideline behavior. We call it, training, coaching with training wheels, right? Joystick coaching, whatever you want to use, you can plug in, right? Not saying that you don't do that, right? But how do we develop better decision makers? Well, it's not by them having only a specific answer or solution, right? Again, this all feeds and connects from the training environment that we provide Monday through Friday to the match environment when we get into the weekend. Okay. Any questions? Feel free to stop me and do that. Okay. There's more. There's a few more things to highlight. Okay. And then we go into part of the responsibility that I feel is like Warren and I continue to take courses. We always look at how can we become better? How do we use the technique of guided questions, right? How do we learn how to provide solutions and options without giving the players the answers, right? This will develop a deeper learning of the players in the environment, right? We call it reality-based training, right? How do we connect the training session to be more like a game? Because the most time of those scenarios that we provide, the better it is for them to prepare them for that match on the weekend or whenever, right? Those are the key. And then we get a lot of questions. Well, wait a minute, coach. Not every player, Mark brought up earlier, not every player is the same level. We have some very players that are into the game. Absolutely. Less instruction is beneficial. There's no doubt about it, right? But we have to have that balance. There are younger players that need to do foundational skills. They need to master foundational skills, right? We need to teach the principles of the game. We need to show them how we'd like them to play, right? There's that balance. This is coaching, folks. This is coaching. This is the key part. This is the secret sauce why some coaches can take something that's written on a paper, right? Read it, get a test session, and then be able to adapt it. This is the autonomy. This is that freedom, our own will to make decisions, choices, present, and so forth, right? Those are the things.
The other, Kostas,
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, please. Yes.
The other thing that I always think about with coaches constantly engaging with players is the more you're talking, the less they're playing. So there's also that balance of talking time and ball time in a session. And I think that's important because I say that because I'm guilty of that. I'm guilty of too many words too often.
You know, if you were the only one, my friend, I think we wouldn't have a need for this webinar. I can tell you that right now. Warren and I were talking about this earlier. Literally just this topic. And I'd like to get, Mark, your input back on that, because I have a follow-up question for you. It's almost like we have so much on our mind, right? That we want to make everything so easy, and we want to dump so much information on them, right? I like your input on, by when you're talking and constantly giving this information, how much do you think these players absorb? And it's an open-ended question. Anybody can answer it, but I'd love to hear from Mark as well, because it kind of leads to that.
You're absolutely right, and I think as coaches as we get more experience, we get to understand that something that you said earlier, less is more, and we need to look for key punch points, where we can drive the message with as few words as possible and get them engaged again. I think the big thing is, if it's guided learning or whatever, stop, chat, move, kind of get them going again as quickly as possible.
Yeah. So if I may paraphrase for you, you're almost saying, let the game be the teacher.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we all know there's multiple ways of approaching the coaching role. But if there's specific, that you can, as opposed to stopping the whole game, you can pull a player aside for 30 seconds, get your point across while the game's continuing, while whatever you're doing is continuing, and then throw them back in, and maybe reinforce it a little bit later, or whatever.
Yeah, love it. I think we don't have to do freeze moments all the time, right? If there was something specific to one player that could have been adjusted, you don't have to stop. A training session or a scrimmage, you can isolate that particular situation. Great call. Love it. Love it. Thank you for that. And anyone else can just jump in. It's really completely cool to do it for you, right? And then it back to Mark's point, back to what we've been discussing, right? You're going to hear this thing. There's a lot of repetition in terms of player-centered approach, right? We also need to, the Harry Kane reference earlier, right? We have to be attuned with players' needs. We also have to accept that every player is not the same. They're not going to go on the same trajectory. They're not going to grow and develop and learn and be able to execute on the same path. It's impossible. That's the individuality that comes with the game. That's the beauty of the game, actually. That's where creativity can come in, right? And finding solutions from different areas and so forth, right? And I'll finish with one piece in this kind of part of the discussion, is that this is massive. I will tell you that feedback is incredibly important, right? It has to be constructive, right? It has to be relative and almost objective, if it's possible, to do it, right? And then also the players will need to reflect back. And I'll tell you one thing for me. I was that guy on the sideline screaming. I was that coach that was giving instruction every, pass to him, move off the ball, go wide, do this. I was that coach. When I realized who the most important part of that game or the opportunity is the player. That's number one. That was a big shift for me. The next paradigm shift that I internally realized is when I started reflecting. I started reflecting on myself. I started reflecting on my coach, my training sessions, my game, I would say, behavior, right? The one tool that I used was when I started using video a little bit, right? It doesn't have to be every time, but there were moments when I started doing that. For me, that was massive. I feel that I became a better coach. Now, in my journey, I think there's a ways to go yet. There's a long way to go. But it's kind of cool that the reflection, the moment that I realized reflection is important to my growth, I felt I started becoming a better coach. That to me was kind of really a positive moment, an aha moment for me, right? The same thing can be said for players, right? Do we give them the opportunity to reflect, right? Warren and I were just talking right before I literally came off the field with our regional and national team selections in Florida. Thankfully, it got warmer today. It's been brutal cold for Florida. That's a whole different discussion. But we tell them to identify, hey, what? And a lot of these players are very critical of themselves. So we say, hey, don't forget, what did you do well, right? And what do you want to continue, right? And where are the opportunities to improve on? So they take away, they have a reflection on training sessions and games, what they did well and where the opportunities were to grow. Once they identify, we don't give them the answers, but they're able to do this. It's the same thing that we as coaches should do. Why wouldn't we do the same thing? Yeah. So those are the kind of things. So again, it all kind of buns this whole thing together, right? We're talking about better environments, better players, right? Less is more. And perhaps the most important thing is that the game is the teacher. Back to what Mark was talking about, right? I think there's a bigger, higher calling on this thing. It's not just about them becoming developing better as players. There's a love and growth in the game that'll take place a little bit more organically, in a way that it supports their love of the game for their life. Why not? If they get to a certain age, they don't want to play, they can be referees. How about them becoming coaches? How about them having kids down the road that will eventually bring them into the sport? That's how we can build this. Become fans and support the pro teams or the college teams. Go watch these games. This is the cool part about this, I would say, approach to the game, as opposed to just the constant instructional type. Any questions? I'm open to that. Anybody wants to jump in? Anything? Add anything from their experiences? I would love to hear that.
A couple of questions just in looking at it and thinking about it.
Yes.
You ever allow the players, so I know that you're talking about giving feedback. Have you ever let them come in and talk about, how the system's running, who plays where? Do you allow them to provide feedback within halftime to help develop maybe even the training plans? Is that something you're looking at?
Yeah. Wow. That's a great question. One of the things that we want to do is part of the ability to reflect, especially when you provide a system and positional stuff, is we may see a player differently. I'll give you the example, like I have the 2010s, the 2010 national team, the 2010s, my starting 2 and 3, my starting right back and left back. At their club, they play 7-11. They play as wingers, right left winger, because that's the style that I want to play, right? So for them, that took a lot of talking. Think about the conversation. I don't want to bring parents in it just yet, but think about a conversation with the parents. That, hey, she only plays up top, right? And now convert her into a right back that has to overlap and get forward. There's a lot of discussion, and we want that input because there are players that just may not be comfortable in doing that, right? They may not be comfortable, and so we do want to take their input, not only from a style of play, but position, and maybe we miss something. Hey, we make mistakes as well. Did that answer Warren a little bit on? Did that clarify a little bit or follow
Sounds
up?
awesome. Yeah, because I was thinking, because going off that same thing too, and not to toot a horn or anything, but one thing I always enjoy is like at halftime when you go in and you set the cones down and start letting the kids kind of develop their ideas and their thoughts and kind of see what they're doing and how many times it matches up exactly to what you're thinking. Because one thing that I think, to your point, is that we have a tendency to think that we have all the answers, but man, you'd be surprised how sharp these kids are. Especially that have played for a while. Now they may not always be right, but there's always been, to me, it's always been interesting to see kind of what their thoughts are and how they're approaching the game. It also gives you an insight to how you can help support them better.
Yeah, I think that's huge, Warren, what you just said right there on number one, right? The autonomy, the trusting the players. Yeah, that's huge. And this is the other thing. And I keep thinking, man, your players will go through a wall for you. I go, no, I just let them make decisions. And I'm okay if they make mistakes, by the way.
Yeah.
It's one of the cool
doubt.
part about this kind of, I think in general, U.S. soccer is taking a pretty good path down this road, right? They understand the impact of the players, right? It truly is about the players, right? You've got to give them a little bit more of this autonomy, if you will, to do it. Awesome, fantastic. And you all can put some message in the text as well if you want some more questions answered. And I know Warren is incredibly accessible and available to kind of follow up on all this stuff. And so this is really a great discussion. And I wanted to kind of leave I wanted to kind of share with you all through U.S. Soccer as coach educators, there's a new pathway. There's a new technical leadership pathway. It's the opportunity to view the game from a higher ecosystem, a higher level, right? And the importance of club leaders, as an example, is, are we serving ourselves? That's what leadership represents. Are we taking care of ourselves? And then are we in the path of growth? Do we have that growth mindset to learn and so forth, right? Then the other piece is, how do we help coaches around us develop, right? How do we be a supporting, like what you coaches are doing today, right? How do we have this network where we support each other, and how do we learn from each other, right? Continue to develop. Ultimately, player development piece, huge important, right? That's what it's about, right? Let's not forget it. But how do all that fit together within player development model? We understand the player, but listen, if we don't help develop coaches, right? Go to the other one, identity. If we don't have a great identity of who we are and what we want to be, as whether it's a club, as a team, as a state association, right? It's real difficult to develop players in that spirit, right? And then ultimately that ecosystem. What does the environment look like? Who affects the soccer ecosystem? There's this course, it's called CTL, Club Technical Leadership, right? That focuses on these domains. And it's a brand new path. It's just starting in 2024, right? And it's really, it's going to be part of the club standardization that has already started within US soccer. Other countries around the world have this. We are doing it. We're aligning with FIFA and other sanctioning bodies to make sure we offer this thing. And I'm just bringing this up because we're seeing the importance of this stuff happening, right? It's not just, here's a session plan, go out and run a session. How do we provide more tools for our players? How do we provide more tools for our coaches and our associates in the environment? And ultimately, are we growing? Or, is the last license that I took back in 1995, and have we've grown through the game? Because the game is changing every year. I mean, right now, you think about the game, you think at the pro level, you think about the amount of high pressing that's happening. You think about where the goals are coming from, how they are developed, how 2 or 3 touches and you have a ball in the back of the net, right? It's not just all possession, right? We have to adapt and learn. And how do we deal with that, so forth, right? I want to share with this for you. We'll share this deck a little bit. This dives a little bit more in terms of this club environment. And by the way, here's the beauty part of this stuff. There's not one answer. It's not like, oh, here's the secret sauce. Do it. No, you have to understand your environment, right? You have to, we're all in different parts of the country. My environment is going to be different than Warren's environment, which is going to be different than Mark's environment or Eric's, right? They're going to be different, right? There's ethnicity that comes into it. There's backgrounds and experiences that are hugely important, right? And then you got players from other levels. We have to all just accept that. That's what this does. We have some courses that are starting, and a lot of them are virtual. You can reach out. We'll have some contacts to help you out. Warren and I are going to collaborate in one of these courses to be in Texas and to support you guys. So there's some really cool things happening in the game. There's some really, really neat things that US Soccer is understanding that we have to provide more resources, right? The impact of the team, the parents, all these things, how they affect it. Right, cool. Now I'll leave you with one thing, because this is more of an open discussion trying to figure out. Ultimately, we don't know where the player the player journey will take him. We don't know where they end up. If we are the tree, if we are the one that are creating that coach a team or manage a club or doing something like this, we really don't know where these players are going to sit in their journey of development, right? That's why the autonomy is unlocking it, is the key that unlocks it, the potential. It also, I feel, unlocks our potential as coaches. We don't necessarily know where we're going to end up. Maybe we have a path, we have an idea, right? What we want to do, but that's the beauty of the game, and I think that's the cool part of the game. It's truly a worldly sport for a reason, and good grief. That's it for me. Warren, thank you very much. I want to stay on for some questions. Are there any questions? I want to open it up to anybody that has anything more.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, I've got a couple of things to jump in on that. But, you talked about earlier when you first started off coaching, you were very direct in coaching, preaching on. How did you personally overcome that to change the way you coached? Was there any aha moment that you possibly had that might have really led to that? Because I know from just in the coaching course we're teaching here, you see a lot of that same mentality within our coaches that want to do the right thing, and they think by directing everything, it's going to be better for the players.
Yeah, it for me, it was a change that I made in from one club to another. I was at a club that I literally was told, "Hey, listen, the parents need to know you're working. You must be screaming the entire time. That's how they feel they get their money's worth, right?" And then I went to another club, and I had a mentor that said, "When you listen, you will bust your butt in training. You will do everything that you need to maximize every training session. But I want you to get yourself a chair on the sideline game day, get a notepad, and just sit down and take notes and prepare for the next training session and let the kids play to learn and grow." To me, it took somebody else telling me that. And then I took it upon myself to use video recordings, like a recording tool. It wasn't video back then. I can tell you it wasn't that. And then that was a moment when there were very few video opportunities to record. Now there's there's a lot of tools. There's a lot of tools. And then ultimately I took another step forward in coach education when I started taking more courses. And one of the biggest part is reflection. I never reflected. I tell you, I'll give you an example of a coach that I had that actually I started looking at him, and after every training, he would go in his car and took his phone out, and I said, "Dude," I said, I walked in the parking lot. He was talking like there's no one in the car. He wasn't on the phone. So I said, "What were you doing?" He goes, "Oh, I was just reflecting on the game because I didn't want to wait 24 hours. I want to do it now, and then I'll go back tonight and listen to the recording of my input and my reflection of the game I coached." I thought, man, what a great idea. What a great idea. For
Oh,
me,
that is huge.
yeah, for me, it's all about notes. And I walk around with a little notepad constantly. I take, and that's how I've learned. The recording did not work for me, but taking notes on a piece of paper did.
That's awesome. Your point too, I don't think it's just soccer specific. I talked to a high school basketball coach the other day that said the same thing. When they sat on the bench, parents didn't think they were working, but if they're screaming the whole time, they felt like they were coaching. And so it's
Yeah.
funny how that transfers to other sports as well.
Yeah,
Next one is
it's
oh,
a
go ahead.
learning, right? And that's why part of it is, to the parents understand that they didn't know what you're doing, right? They're not there usually at training session, but they will be there at the games on the sideline on the other side. So
I don't know if have you heard of Jocko Willink by any
Yeah.
chance? Extreme ownership. One of
Yep.
the things that always stood up to me is that, if the parents don't get it, there's only one person to look at. It's that coach that hadn't explained it or hadn't gotten through the message well enough. So to your point, I think that's awesome. The next one is, do we start to look at move on from a coach that just understands the direct coach or direct teach? Are there any tricks that you found to help within coaching education to help build the guided questions, to build I know a lot of the stuff is it sets up the environment for them to learn, but how do you transfer or make that transfer into the coaches that are taking your classes to help develop those guided questions?
Yeah, I really think, Warren, this may be the most important piece of a shift in how we coach. And when we are able, that's why in one of the slides I said we must become vulnerable. We must also accept the fact that we don't have all the answers, and part of vulnerable being that like in a club environment, right? I know we prophesize that, and we want to make sure in our state associations that we are okay with coaches making mistakes and having that be part of the learning process, right? And that, you see, the more that we allow our players to make mistakes, I believe the more tolerant we will be of ourselves making mistakes and learning in that scenario, right? We're not going to have all the guided questions in our hip pocket, right? But instead of, I would think of, if we have a point to make, right? Maybe being wider, right? The player didn't get wide enough, so we didn't get the ball. We were very compact in possession, so we couldn't build and be able to get forward. Maybe hey, where could maybe they ask, for example, to a coaches or to a players, like, where's their space? Something as simple as that. Where's their space? And then the player will go, well, out there. I said, okay, go. You know what I mean? So rather than us telling them, maybe provide them the opportunity to ask that question, and we're not going to get it right the first time, right? It's okay to experiment ourselves. If we're tolerant of the players, we got to be tolerant of us not being able to be perfect all the time.
I always think the purest form of the game is the fact that it's a player's game. The player has to learn to problem solve and figure out the problems on their own. I always felt like it was our responsibility as a coach to be able to create an environment where they feel free to do that in training. So when they get in the game, they have to wait on somebody going, hey, pass to Sally, or, Billy's open or whatever. They're starting to figure out the way it goes. And so I know that's one thing that you push through with your education stuff too. And so I really appreciate that as well.
Yeah.
Then the next thing I had is on skill development. You talked about that in the beginnings, and especially with some of the confusion I get within our grassroots courses here, is that they feel like there's no skill development when it's actually the exact opposite. I kind of want to see your thoughts or feelings on that. Say, for example, for our 4x4 or 77 grassroots coaches that might be out there looking and listening. What are your thoughts as far as that's concerned?
Yeah, absolutely. So, we have to understand when we talk about the grassroots and the grass coaching model, right? It's like there's a player profile, and the player profile at different ages, different stages of development, right? A lot of it doesn't really get into the technical need. But here's the thing, having lines of players dribbling through cones, things like that. One, is that really realistic in the game? It's not, right? And I can tell you, I watched a couple really high-level APL games this weekend. There's some highlights. I saw 2 goals scored with their toe. Okay, so it's not necessarily a bad thing when you toe poke the ball in the net. So these are all things that can be learned within the training curriculum, the training environment, right? Now, do they have to understand what body shape is, right? That's difficult to do on their own, right? You have to do it in a matter of time. But if you do it within the context of the training session, then I think it becomes a little bit easier. And then I think the kids could be able to understand it and connect it to actual execution and performance, right? So that's it. Now, there's no replacement for ball touches, right? I have no problem with the coach. Hey, go home, juggle 100 times. There's no, go through cones on your own, but you don't need to do that in a training session, right? Because we've eloquently discussed it with some of your folks on this call. The environments are different. Players are different within a team, right? So understand how that impact is. You have to be coaching to a level where they can take some of the. It's okay to have homework and go home and dribble, go home, hit off a wall, right? So I by no means do we want to not focus on the technical side, right? The development piece, the individual technical, but a lot of the younger ages should be focused on that part of it, right? Me, the ball, and I, right? That's what it is.
Oh, it's perfect. What an incredible answer. Hey, and we'll open up to anybody else. Does anybody else have questions? Well, we got this awesome privilege to have Kostas with us right now.
The privilege is mine, Warren, man. Are you kidding?
Oh, heck, no, I've enjoyed the heck out of it.
I took, as I was writing, I started taking my notes. I go, man, you need to talk about this better. Or, that's a great question. I think Mark asked, oh, well, that's a good question. I'm going to talk about that next time,
Oh, for sure. And I think that's same thing we expect out of our players. I don't think the participants on the call today understand how much their reflection and input helps us develop as we go too. So like I said, if you have a question, something that's stuck in your mind during this time, please feel free to unmute. While they're doing that, I'll plug in the upcoming. We've got kind of exciting webinar coming up here at 2:00. That's our first ever Spanish webinar featuring Sam Gerardo from Tennessee. And then Sammy's going to return in the next one in 2 weeks with the English version of the same topic. And we've got our own Alex Perez will be doing the next one in Spanish in 2 weeks as well. And that one's going to be really, really exciting. We've got some really cool ones coming up. We've got Janae Balakowski coming up for why take coaching courses. So I thought that'd be something kind of fun to put out to our associations, to those coaches that need to understand. And then John Cohn is going to be doing one on, in training and how to train and right load and right development. So we got some really good ones coming up here in the future, and it should be really, really interesting. But with that, I'll hold for one more second. Does anybody have any questions within our group? And if not, I'll close us out. And thank you very much, Kostas, for taking the time out of your time.
I think Mark unmuted. I don't know if there's a, yep.
No, Kostas, I was just going to say thank you for your time, and Warren, thanks for setting this up. It's it's, as coaches, we need all these little reminders, and I always find, having coached for a while, that it's the small little things. Sometimes you forget about it. Sometimes it's just a little reminder, something. It's just one little point to add to your list of points. So these things are important, and it's an investment in time. So thank you guys.
Well, thank you, Mark. Thanks for that input too, because that means a lot to us, and it makes it worth it.
Yeah, we appreciate it. Thank you, and everybody's participation. And that's how we all coach it. That's how we all learn and grow it together. Yeah, no doubt about it. Thank you, Warren, as well. I think these are tremendous, and you're gonna have a lot of fun with. I know Sammy and Janae. They're personal friends, and so they are top quality people, not just great coaches.
No, it's gonna be interesting. Yeah, I can't wait. Like I said, I found out with these webinars, I'm learning more than anybody else, I think, because every time I've come on, it's kind of a selfish pursuit for me to gain knowledge. So, and I use everybody else to help that out. So I can't tell you personally how much I appreciate your time, and as well as on behalf of all Nortex, we appreciate you taking the time to help us out, and look forward to seeing you in the future.
We'll see you out on the pitch somewhere. Thank you all.